Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guests today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back into some more bite-sized business advice. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how you live a story worth telling. That to me sounds intriguing. I think we've talked about even on some recent episodes how we might be asleep at the wheel in some cases, especially as business owners, just going through the same day every single day, Groundhog Day, right? Well, we want to get outside of that today, and I think we're going to have an interesting conversation about how to do just that. I have an amazing guest with me, Bill Blankshane. Welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Oh, Brandon, a pleasure to be here. I love that music, by the way. My foot was tapping. It was a lot of energy that you're bringing to the table. This is great.
I love it. Shout out to Canva and their free music and templates. Couldn't do this without all of the amazing tools behind the scenes. But I'm excited to have you here, Bill. And you talked about you have 5 keys and a dynamic driver that, your words, not mine, guarantee success.
Sure.
That's a big claim, right? So I want to get to that, of course, because we're here because we want success. We're entrepreneurs. We want business success. We want personal success. And you have a path and a framework to get there. But I want to back up and talk about the story piece. Live a story worth telling.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, I think we all are living a story. First of all, we need to understand that what we're doing in life is living out a story. Mark Twain put it like this. He was really kind of a cynical guy, if you know anything about Mark Twain. He put it like this. He called it living a soap bubble life. And he said, that's what we do. Most people do. They just kind of float around for a little while. They look kind of shiny in the sun and then pop. Life's over, right? And what did they accomplish? And he concluded, well, there's not much more to life than that. I disagree with that. But if we're not careful, we can accidentally drift into that. And especially as entrepreneurs, as business owners, we're often really driven, we're focused, we're on our goal. And if we're not careful, we can always have blinders on and not see the things that really matter and see long-term what really matters in life, to actually live a story that's worth telling someday, right? And so we have to be intentional about that in order to do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. First of all, that's a terrible outlook on life. Mark Twain. Let's not live that kind of a life. But as business owners, I think, and I deal with a lot of our clients where they come to us and they'll say, I have a boring business, or my business, I don't have one of those sexy businesses, where people think they're going to be on the cover of Forbes magazine, and you talk about all these celebrity entrepreneurs, and I think it limits you to have that perspective. So what do you say to those people? Because I know you deal with a lot of ordinary entrepreneurs and businesses. I believe we all have a story, but what's the perspective shift that those people need to have?
Yeah. Well, and I have a unique position because I deal with people across the spectrum, from big names like John Maxwell and Lewis Howes and all these kind of big names, to people you've never heard of but are out there building businesses, doing incredible work. I just spent a few days last week with a whole bunch of incredible entrepreneurs. And so I know they're doing great things. I think the key to that is to think about why you do what you do. Right. What is the why behind that? We get so busy doing, going, looking at what the next goal is, that we never stop. Again, step back, be intentional about that. And I think the key, what it comes down to is, in order to live a story worth telling as an entrepreneur in any setting, it takes faith to do that. It takes believing what you can't see. And I define faith in this way. I say faith is doing what you believe to be true, often in spite of what you see, sense, or feel. And as I said, it begins with doing. Faith is action, right? You don't know what you really believe until you act on it. Then you find out. And so, entrepreneurs, we're used to this. We're used to, hey, I believe this, so I'm going to step out, I'm going to take some risk, I'm going to do some things. But it almost feels like in the business box, that's easier than with all of life. right? And what purpose does my life have? But it takes faith to believe that I have a purpose, that I'm going to set out on a long journey, and in the day to day, I have to believe that I'm headed to a destination that's worth going.
Yeah, entrepreneurs definitely demonstrate faith in a purpose. I echo that, though, that we get disconnected from that, and most
Mm.
people don't even start with their purpose or their why, and it's very
Yeah,
easy to forget. So
yeah,
tell me, let's move into the
yeah,
5 keys. What
yeah.
what what are the 5 keys, and how can we start to incorporate this on in how we approach our day-to-day lives?
Absolutely. So as I go through each one, I'm going to share the key, and then I'm going to share like a key question to ask, right? So key number one is your personality. And by that, I mean, how are you wired for greatness? I think we get into trouble when we try to be someone we're not, but we don't actually study ourselves. We're so busy. We're just going, going, going. And so becoming a student of oneself is critical. We have to examine ourselves, and that could be different personality tests or behavioral hardwiring tests. There's all kinds of good ones out there, but it's more of a lifelong pursuit of becoming a student of who you are. And this was certainly true for me. I went through this process to really figure out how I'm wired for that. And what I came away with was a strengths statement for my life, so that I know I'm at my best when I am creatively questioning, connecting, and communicating in the context of my beliefs. So when I'm doing something that fits all those things, that's my sweet spot. I'm good at it. I love doing it. I'm really passionate about it. And because of that, I've been able to figure out, all right, what is it I want to do, which then resulted in, founding Story Builders and really doing what I love to do every day. So it begins there. It begins with that first P of personality. How am I wired, and becoming familiar with that?
And you said there was a process you went through. Is that something that, like an external process, or is that something you specifically do?
Um, it was something I did. It was organic, right? It was really involving that of taking all these different assessments, everything I could get my hands on, studying myself, seeing what really lights me up, what energizes me, what am I both do I love to do and I'm good at, and then what do I not love to do, what frustrates me, and really becoming a student of myself, so that I could then get to this place of being, that strength statement was a result of multiple years of distilling down a process. Could I do it faster? Absolutely. But at the time I was running a school and nonprofit organization and had 6 kids and all that fun stuff. So I had a lot on my plate. So it took a little longer, but yeah, just working your way through that. Again, being intentional about moving it forward all the time.
I like that. Yeah, that's knowing what you're good at is always powerful. And I'm curious too. I've heard a lot of people have opinions on this, where understanding what you're good at and staying there, and
Mm.
also understanding what you're bad at and improving. I'm curious which path
Mm.
you took, or was it a combination of both?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of what Marcus Buckingham ascribes to, which is, most people think if I can work on my weaknesses, that's where I'll show the most improvement. I don't agree. I agree with Marcus that, in fact, if you're good at something, lean into that, do more of that, and minimize your involvement with things you're not good at. We all have to do things that aren't in our sweet spot all the time. That's the way it should be. But at the end of the day, you're not serving anybody else well by putting more time into places you're just naturally not wired to be good at. And we need to be okay with that. We need to understand we're not all wired to be great at everything, which is why we need each other, right? But everyone's wired for greatness. It's just not everybody's wired for greatness in the same way.
That's a good perspective. I like that. So the second P, what's the second key here?
Yeah, the second key is something that I think a lot of people avoid, but it's your past.
Hmm.
Right. You have to pay attention to your past. What has happened to you to this point? And here's where I think people make a mistake, is they don't understand the value of their past, the value of their story to date, because it's their story. And so it feels normal. It feels like it's no big deal, or in fact, something to be embarrassed about, or a failure, or something like that. But what they miss is that your past is what positions you to share a story and live a story in a way that no one else does, right? We think of the wisdom literature. The book of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. That's true, except the story for each person that is presenting it is different for every single person. No one else has the same story in the whole history of the world. No one else has had exactly the same experiences, exactly the same ups, downs, successes, failures, all that kind of stuff. No one has that. It's unique to you. So understanding that value, so it's asking the question, where have I been? Right? Being okay with looking back, and even in some cases bringing some healing to that process where there's trauma or scars in that process, and figuring out how do those pains and struggles, who does that position me to help? Because of that, there are certain people who I will connect with better than others. And who is that? And that really positions you for what is my unique message going to be to the world.
Mm. What do you look for in someone's, like, you're going to work with them as a client?
Sure.
What are some things that you are going to ask them to develop that story and help them bring about, who am I meant to serve, and what's the
Yeah.
message that I have for the
Yeah.
world?
Yeah. Well, one really clarifying question I have found is to early on, we call it our story focus question, is to ask, hey, if someone were to read a book that you were to write, let's say we're talking about writing a book, which we do all the time. Someone were to read a book, what's the one thing that if they got nothing else out of this book, they read it, they closed it, they walk away, what's the one thing you would hope they would not forget? And that I have found is a very clarifying question that helps people distill it down into a single statement. This is the essence of my message. This is where I'm passionate about. And then once you get to distill that down, then you can blow it up. All right, well, that's this whole book then has got to be about unpacking that one thing. And then you're doing a keynote or different things like a digital course or workshop training, whatever the case may be. It's really an extrapolation of that. So you got to get focused in before you can go larger out.
That makes complete sense, and it's so logical. But I have to also think on the flip side of that, unless that's the first question that you lead with people, when people initially approach this process, they would probably have a bunch of ideas. So
Sure.
where do people usually start? Like, how many different points do they
Yeah.
want to hit on? And I'm also trying to relate this to not specifically a book, but your life, right? We're
Sure.
trying to create a
Sure.
story that you're living out. So before we focus in on that, where do typically
Yeah.
people find themselves?
Yeah. Well, I think typically they find themselves in this conundrum, if you will. I call it the creativity conundrum often, especially for entrepreneurs, that it's almost like the more creative ideas you have, the harder it is to execute on any of them because you're just paralyzed by what you could do. Right. And so one of the things we do early on in the process is invite people to just dump it out, right? Don't judge any of it. Let's just dump it out. Let's put it all on the table. Let's have discussions about what is that? Why does it matter? Allow us to help you sift through that and then to engage with you and say, hey, is this really what matters to you? Why does it matter? What is that about? Because you're looking for not only what matters to you, but what connects with the audience that you want to connect with and what makes sense from a monetary standpoint, right? All three of those things have to come together to really find that sweet spot. And sometimes we find, hey, you've got like 3 or 4 strong candidates and we just need to make them line up. Like, which one do you want to tackle first? Right. And these things would fit within that. And we can figure out that's really what we love to do. Buckingham calls it the strength theme. He calls it input. Right. As a child, that was me. I was always sucking up input. I'd read the cereal box 10 times every morning, just putting it in and being able to hold those ideas in suspense and playing with them. And that's something that we've just gotten really good at doing.
Yeah, that's so cool. I like that process. Okay. The third key, what do we got?
Third key is the people, right? So we got your personality, your past, and now the people. And the question is, who shapes your story? Not only, first of all, there's people in your past who have shaped your story. You need to recognize who they are and whether or not you want to keep them in that story. But when I think about going forward, I think of people as, people who are toxic at the lower end of the scale. Then you got people who are kind of drainers from you. And the kind of the positive side, you got people who are gainers, and then you've got people who are like your heroes at the upper level of that. And then right in the middle, you've got people who are really kind of where you are, right? And so what I always encourage people is have some heroes, certainly people you're trying to aspire to, but the people who are going to be most valuable to you are going to be those gainers, those ones that are a step or two ahead of you, that it feels like you can still connect with them where they are, feels like they're just a little bit further ahead. You can reach ahead and actually achieve that. And that pulls you forward, right? So find the gainers and hang out with them as much as you possibly can. Serve the people around you at the time, so you become known as someone who is serving them. And toxic, of course, avoid them. and even the drainers, right? Minimize your time with them so that, you can then be intentional about who's shaping my story, because we often don't even realize the tremendous impact that people have on our mindset in that process.
Yeah, that principle definitely changed my life. The saying,
Mm,
you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, um, originated, in fact, from the Bible. It's said over and over and over that you become who you spend time with, who you associate with.
sure.
And one of those things that I've always questioned about that very principle
Yeah.
is when you are going to hang out with the gainers. You said specifically, make sure you're adding value and you're being more to that person. How do
Sure.
you prevent being a drainer if they are ahead of you? Like, what's
Yeah.
the key to that relationship?
Yeah. Well, you just said it when you talk about adding value, right? And the key is, we just finished working on a book with Lewis Howes and we were talking about some of these ideas that, in fact, you have, and it was the way he did it actually, in building his platform, was he served other people. He saw something that made him unique, what he knew, and he just went out there and did it for free, right? Story Builders actually came to be because of a project while I was still running this private school in Ohio, on the side with 6 kids and all that kind of stuff. There was a book that had impacted my life. And so I got to know the author, and I had taught from his book in our school for many years. And I told the author, hey, look, I'm in. I love your book. I teach it. I've taught it for years. I'd love to add a curriculum element to this and do a study guide version of this book. And I don't want a dime. I don't want to get paid. I'll tell you that right up front. I just want to do it to be helpful. And because of that, I built a relationship with him, build a relationship with other people, that now I can look back and trace so much of our success with Story Builders came from that one nexus, that one point where I just served, right? And I found myself doing that a lot, and intentionally so, to just serve without any thought of what am I going to make on this deal or anything like that. Just be there for people. And when you do that, those people who are in that position, now you're on their mind. You've impressed them as someone who's there to help and add value, and they're able to contribute back to you often in some ways.
Yeah, it's such a valuable principle too. I want to get to the last two
Yep.
keys and then the critical driver of success, but real
Yep.
quick, in case we like to keep these episodes within a relatively consistent window. That being said, you have an offer for the audience to connect with you and
Oh,
see if
yeah.
this is right for them. So where would you like people to go to connect with you?
Absolutely. So if someone's listening and they're thinking, hey, someone told me I should write a book, or I've thought about writing a book, and you want it done exceptionally well with people you trust and who care about your message, let's have a conversation, right? So a book idea session, no charge, no obligation. We're here to help, we're here to serve you. mystorybuilders.com/story, mystorybuilders.com/story. Just reserve a time and let's talk to one of our senior story strategists. And we'll tell you, hey, you got something to work here, or you don't. Go back to the drawing board or what have you. But we'd love to have that conversation.
I love it. That's awesome. It's in the show notes wherever you're watching or listening down below, so you can find that relatively easy. But let's assume maybe the listeners, and I'm sure a lot of them do have a story. Let's assume they don't. What's the fourth P? What's the fourth key here that if we want to start building
Yeah.
that story, what
Well,
do we do?
first of all, everybody has a story. Whether or not it's the right timing to write a book or the right fit, we can help them
Yes.
figure that out too. Fourth key is your passions. What do you love to do? Right. And you notice this doesn't come until number 4. Some people start there and then try to make sense of it. But I think you got to lay the foundation, then ask the key question, what is it you really love to do? What are you passionate about? What lights you up? Right. And this is a struggle for entrepreneurs many times, because a lot of times they start businesses based on what they think will work, not necessarily what they're passionate about doing. And so I've had the blessing of being able to do both, because I started with this process and realized I could build a business out of what I love to do. And so I would encourage entrepreneurs to be thinking, hey, what are the aspects of my business or how I'm wired that I really love, and lean into those? Or maybe it's I need to start another business that allows me to best pursue those passions. But you got to have that fire to be really meaningful to you.
I like that one, and I do like that you put it where it is, number 4,
Mm.
because on the flip side, I think starting a business just out of passion can also be a little
Sure.
dangerous. I mean, you have to
Sure.
have the combination of multiple elements.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I like that there's that balance there.
Totally.
Okay, enough of me talking. I'm so curious about the
Yeah.
different keys and then
No,
the
that's cool.
critical driver of success. So what's number
Yeah.
5?
So key number 5 is your purpose. So Lewis and I talk about this as your meaningful mission. What is your meaningful mission, right? What now you got to get clarity. You've got that framework. You're so eager to get going. Now you got to get super focused, laser dialed in on that. Your meaningful mission. Like, so for story builders, our meaningful mission is to serve 1,000 story partners to help them tell their story well in a way that makes the world a better place. Now, 1,000 doesn't sound like too many for most businesses, but when the people you're working with are touching millions and millions and hundreds of thousands and tens of thousands of lives on a regular basis, we think of ourselves as a catalyst, right? We help elevate everything they're doing and bend their growth curve upward. And so that's our mission, right? But we know what that mission is. We talk about it a lot. We keep it front and center. And so that to live a story worth telling, you've got to be on mission. It's got to be meaningful to you. And it has to be a mission, something you have to go out and achieve. And it's, a good mission is going to be a little hard, right? It's not going to come easy. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some mountains, that you're going to encounter. But we have to remember that mountains make the best settings for stories, right? Think about Lord of the Rings, for example. What do? They're always walking over mountains. That's part of the symbolism of how difficult it is. So purpose is really where it begins.
I like that. Can you talk for just quickly about, because I'm sure you meet a lot of people who don't have that fleshed out yet, with a lack of purpose from a business side, from a personal and life perspective. Where do you see people typically end up if they're not crystal clear on what that purpose is?
They end up in that soap bubble life. They look shiny, they look iridescent, they look cool, but there's just nothing inside, right? They go through the motions. This is why for me, it always comes back to authenticity. It's one of our core values with our company. And for me is that you got to be real, right? Wherever you are, whoever you are, be the same person, walk in integrity in that way. And I think a lot of people, when they don't have that purpose, they just drift and they feel empty, but they can't quite put their finger on why. Right. And so even if people come to us and they're like, oh, I'm not really clear on my purpose, that's fine. Might not be the right time for us to work with you. Right. So we're happy to give that feedback because we put people first.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. It's one of those things that I see probably more often than anything else. And I'm sure you do too. I was just on a call, as a matter of fact, before we started recording this podcast, where the majority of the call, there was, I think, 8 or 9 other entrepreneurs there, was spent with people talking about what markets they should serve. And these are established businesses and they're just wishy-washy on, should I go into this market? Should I go into this niche? And I just saw, other than anything else, a lack of clarity on their purpose. They didn't have a mission. They didn't know why they exist as a company, or probably as a human being. And you just get so confused without it.
Yeah. Well, the quotation that always comes to my mind in these settings is, I think it was Davy Crockett, actually, of all people, one of those frontier guys who said this. He said, really simple, be sure you're right, then go ahead.
I like it.
If you're sure you're right, then let's do it. I mean, that's how they did it in the frontier days, apparently, but it works well for us too. We can become so paralyzed by, oh, I'm just not sure. I don't know. Well, get sure. And if you're sure you're right, then do it. And what I have found is that when you do it, things tend to work out in ways you never realized they could or would in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have promised a critical driver to success that guarantees success. I've been waiting for this one. I can't wait to hear what it is. So tell me, what is it?
So I call it the dynamic driver, because it really is what propels someone forward. And the research has shown that if someone will do this, that above all the other things is the key to success. There was a study done in the late 90s of super talented people who had achieved success in all these different areas of life. And it came down to sharing the one thing they all had in common, one thing, and that was the 6th P, if you will, persistence. They simply never quit. So the question is, what will it take to stop you? Right? You can look at a whole range of experts in this space who say the same thing, but I found it true in my own life. Like, what separates the winners from the rest often is they simply never quit. They kept moving forward every single day. They felt like it, didn't feel like it, didn't matter. They kept moving forward. and simply refused to quit. There's a tremendous story here. Take just a minute. I can tell this. This is a book actually by Glenn Cunningham called Never Quit. I don't know if you know the name. Most people don't. He was the first person in history to run a 4-minute mile. It was unofficially a 4-minute mile, which is why he doesn't always get the credit for it, but he had a stellar running career. What few people know about him, though, is that when he was like 8 years old, he and his brother went into a schoolhouse. I think it was in Nebraska, like in the middle of nowhere in the wintertime, went to light the fire. Somebody had put gasoline in the kerosene cans. The whole place just lit up. His brother died. Make a long story short, his brother died. Doctors said Glenn would never walk again. He was so scarred, permanent injuries. They didn't think he'd make it. But not only did he make it, he adopted this mentality of, I won't quit. I'll never quit. I'll never quit. And over the years, he kept walking, running. Everywhere he'd go, once he could run, he started to run, and he just kept running through the history books because he simply never quit. And two things I love about that. One, the only reason I know the story is he wrote a book. That's the power of a book. He's no longer with us, of course, but the book is, right? So the book has staying power. The other thing I love is that the best thing about Glenn is he started a camp for boys who were struggling in life. And through that camp, he was able to help tens of thousands of young men grow up and become better people through the result of that. And it's all because he simply never quit. And so I often am encouraged by that when I feel like, I want to give up. And just take one more step. That's all you have to do. Take one more step. And the reality is the people who don't stop are guaranteed to win because they will be guaranteed to move forward. They're guaranteed to be in a better place as they move that story forward. And it becomes then a story that's truly worth telling.
I have seen that play out over and over and over with both myself, with other people, with people I've never met. The persistence, it's got to be one of the hardest things to do, though, because you're getting, in order to have persistence means you're getting constant feedback that you're not making progress or enough progress.
Right.
And to just continue to push through is just what's required.
Yeah. I just had this experience with these guys last week. We were doing a cold plunge. And it was really cold. They really poured the ice in there. It was much colder than it needed to be, believe me. But I got in there, and when I'm doing cold plunges, I always like to use it as an opportunity to work on my mindset. And this was super cold, so cold it was like hurting, right? So I know all the health guys are like, oh, that's not healthy. You shouldn't have done. I get it, but it was a bunch of guys together. I couldn't just hop out, right? So they were all doing 2 minutes. And so I was like, nope, I'm going to develop my persistence muscle here, right? So I kept in for 3, 4. I would have kept going, but I'm like, all right, this is the longest anyone's been in, so I'm good. Then of course, 2 guys after me were like, well, if you did 4, I'm going to do more than you, right? But the point is an opportunity for me to develop that dynamic driver, that persistence. I'm just going to stick it out, even though it hurts a bit. I'm going to stick it out, push through, knowing that developing that muscle, I can use it in other places in life.
Yeah, there's that crossover too, though, specifically with that story where you go from the persistence muscle to the ego muscle. And I think at 5 minutes, I think that kicks in.
At 5 minutes? I've done 7 before, but it wasn't that cold as much as they had. I think the cold determines, when the ego kicks in or not.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Bill, this is phenomenal. I'm sure you could talk for hours and days on this topic, and there's so much more to unpack that I wish we had time for, but we don't. But I love to end these episodes with action, because I do not want the listeners to just hear this and go about living the same old story, right? Let's create a story that's a little bit more worth living, a little bit more inspiring, on purpose, on mission. So I like to end with a question. We believe that powerful questions get powerful answers. You've asked a number of them over the course of this episode, so feel free to reuse. But my question is based on what we talked about. What would you want the listener to walk away and ask themselves until they got that powerful answer? Excuse me.
Yeah, I would want them to be asking, do I believe my story is worth telling? And there's a secondary question to that of, if not, why not? Or if so, why so? Right? Because I think a lot of people never give it a thought. Because it's a scary question. Do I believe my story is worth telling? Because the answer might be, I'm not really sure. And where does that leave me? Or I'm pretty sure it isn't. Where does that leave me? Right. That means you got to take action, right? So it's a question that might create some unease with people. And I hope so, because that's how we grow, is we recognize where we are is not where we should be. And so that can move you then to engage with these personality paths, people, passions, purpose, and do it all with persistence. And I'll tell you what, you do that and commit to doing that, I guarantee you 3 years from now, your life is going to look very different. It's going to be a far better place, and you're going to be much more confident. Yes, I am living a story that's truly worth telling.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great question. And if it is yes, and you want to tell the story to people, I would encourage you, again, down below, mystorybuilders.com/story. Go talk to a member of Bill's team and see if there's a book inside of you. I think that's fantastic. Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Brandon, my pleasure. My pleasure. Appreciate it.
For those of you watching, listening, wherever you are, make sure you subscribe. We love bringing this content to you every single day of the week to help you move your business and your life forward. And of course, build a more harmonious business and life. Thanks for being here. We'll see you on tomorrow's episode.